This is an explicit podcast where we try to keep the conversations as raw and authentic as possible with no intentions of hurting anyone. So if you're very woke, religious, or sensitive, we highly recommend you do not tune in.
Things to watch, but...
Your husband is from...
He's German, yeah, but he's been here for 7 years, 6 years.
Where did you guys meet?
Here.
Here in
a
Malaysia?
supermarket, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, in Publica.
Yeah, so he picked you up there.
Yeah, I
lovely.
know. Yeah, so yeah, then he was supposed to be here 2 years and then ended up staying for like ever. So let's see.
For you?
Yeah,
is it?
yeah.
He was here for work.
He was here for work and then decided to just stay. So,
okay.
Yeah, so he's been here. So.
Yeah. We're actually rolling already.
Okay.
It's okay. Yeah. Guys, Katyana in the house today.
Hello.
Yeah, and we got Harish helping me out with the AV. Let's get it, guys. Don't usually film in the mornings, but a lot more energy actually in the mornings. Yeah. So Katyana is a child psychologist.
Yes.
Yes, and you're currently working on your PhD, right?
Yes, fingers crossed if that all works out. Yeah, the goal is to get the PhD started.
Are you enrolled right now?
So not exactly. So I'm kind of applying to Germany, and their process of application is slightly backward from like the Commonwealth school like sort of process that I'm used to.
Yeah.
So you don't actually apply to a university, you apply to a supervisor.
Okay.
And so the supervisor has to kind of come up with an arrangement with you. Then once they like you, then they will tell the university, this is my student, sign her up. So it's slightly terbalik from backwards from what we're used to in sort of British schools and Australian schools.
So ideally, you want to go over to Germany?
So it's a distance program. So it's a PhD that's designed for professionals, which is more typical in Europe, where they assume everybody's got a job and is doing, they're a lot older. So it's independent learning. So I'll be hopefully being able to still stay here and work and do things, and then head over there every year or so.
That's what you would prefer, right? To stay over here while...
Yeah.
because your family's here as well.
I have family here, and then I have my practice here, so going to be a bit difficult to kind of shut that down. So yeah, ideally, and it actually works out because by having my practice here, I'd be able to have access to like a sample set for the research and stuff. So it works out to be here. And surprisingly, because I've never been to a European university other than the UK, the system's very different. So I didn't even think about applying to Europe. It was all so when I had applied for or looked to start my PhD in the UK, because I got my master's in the UK, it was very much a full-time program. So you have to be on campus doing classes. You can't have a full-time job. And also you pay the school to be a PhD student. So there's fees. And depending on what school you go to in the UK, for example, it's like, easily for the duration of your course, 200,000 British pounds, which is a lot of money.
Pounds.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Over the duration of your program, depending how long it's going to be. So it's a pretty hefty sum. But in Europe, it seems to be slightly different, where they kind of, like I said, assume everybody's got a full-time job. So the programs are a lot more based on independent study. And because they view it as research that you're contributing to them, oftentimes they will pay you to do the research. So if for example, if you could get a grant, or if the supervisor has a grant, you get a salary for doing the research. So it's backward. So the school fees for the school that I'm actually applying to, I was quite shocked, is 150 euros. That's all I have to pay for the PhD. So a bit of a very big change from what I was looking at before. But I think the appeal is just that it's an independent study kind of program. So if you have a full-time job, you have a family, you can't be on site, it's sort of a better format.
Okay.
So.
Just now you mentioned that right now is a very interesting time in your life. You're having currently have a 4-month-old.
Yes, I do.
And at the same time, you decided to do your PhD.
Yes, I did.
So you haven't studied for 10 years,
I haven't studied for more than that. I mean, I think it's been 10 years. You're right. 10 years since I've written an academic paper.
Yeah.
So even just going back into doing literature reviews for my proposal has been...
How was it?
Different. Yeah, different. Difficult, but interesting being back into study mode.
You could say that this is you could have chosen a busier time in your life.
No,
right?
really no. I'm a glutton for punishment, apparently. But it's probably the most chaotic time, but I think...
So why did you choose to do it right when you were going to conceive and all?
Well, I think it was more just that I had been telling myself that there would be a time to do it. Like, I'd kind of been waiting for the right time. But that never happened. Things just got busier. You know, work at the hospital got crazier. And so I think just waiting for that right moment where things were quiet was just never going to happen. But after, you know, starting a family, I think I realized that it's just going to get busier. The little one's going to get bigger. She's going to have things she needs to do. So right now, where she's just tiny, I might as well just capitalize on the quiet that we have now, because it's just going to get busier. So.
Fun fact, I had a diploma in childcare, early childhood education.
Nice.
Yeah, so 1 year, it was a one year diploma course, 1.5 years. Yeah, teaching kids from 8 months till 5 years old. Yeah,
that's a fun age.
Yes, very fun. I would say the best is when they're 3. You know, maybe about 2 plus to 3. Those are the best. When they reach 4 and 5, some of them get pretty
challenging.
Yes, very challenging. Okay, and I'm immediately reminded of this kid, right? So when they would have nap time, you know how it's very different, right? You don't do educating, right? Like
not
for
as much, no.
Younger kids.
No.
Yeah, I remember having to help the kids out with nap time. So everyone's gonna lie in their mattresses in class, and there was this kid staring right at me. He's like the oldest kid amongst all the others. He was like 5 plus, so within a few months he's gonna go to primary school. So he would stare at me and he would count, you know, he's basically flexing like he knows how to count up till 99.
Wow.
So he would count out loud and just trying to annoy me, you know, and he knows that I'm I'm a trainee student, so maybe I don't exercise my authority or stuff like that. So he would do that shit, and that was quite annoying.
they become their personalities become a lot more prominent when they're about 4 or 5, right? You can kind of see where the cute might turn into the difficult when they're at that age.
Yes, but also one thing that's so interesting, and I've talked about this too many times probably, is the education system. So different. Everything is just focused on play. Play. You don't tell them what to do at all. You know, you sometimes I would try and suggest, why don't you play with this, and then the teacher would be a bit annoyed at me. Teacher would say like, just let them decide. They know what they want. You don't have to tell them what to do. Whereas if compared to, did you do your kindergarten over here in Malaysia?
Yes.
Yeah, so how is that like? It's basically primary school, but for even younger kids, right?
Yes, it's basically an introduction to primary school over here. Yeah, we have a lot more structure. I think the Asian education system is a lot more rigid, and a lot more structured, whereas I think westernized education is a lot more sort of play-based in the early years and stuff. So I think recently there was a I'm not going to say a controversy, but there was a little bit of a heated conversation online about the standard of education between Malaysian first graders and American first graders. So I think it was made famous by a Malaysian dad who lives in the US and has a son who attends first grade there, and compared to what
US to Malaysian.
So a Malaysian family who's living in the US, and dad had shared a picture of what his first grader was doing, and that was in response to a standard 1 teacher here who had put up what a standard 1 curriculum looks like. And it is jarringly different.
How so?
So Malaysian ones are very much, like you said, very academic based. So they were asking, it's quite high level in my opinion, questions about math and science and things like that, even at standard 1, whereas the first grader in the US was focusing on handwriting skills. So there was lots of coloring, there was lots of just like tracing letters and things like that. But standard 1 is just like, Billy has 5 balls and this, so it's a lot more sort of like teaching them, like a curriculum.
Basic grammar. Very basic grammar.
And so there's a difference there.
This incident where I will not forget. So I brought to school, you're supposed to bring to school, what do you call that? Like play activities for the kids, but also there's benefits to it, like how they're supposed to develop from that. So I brought to school tracing papers. And I wrote the alphabets or the numbers, teach them basic stuff. And the teacher gave me that look like she knew that I'm just some kid from Asia that has a totally different mindset. And she told me like, you don't have to teach them grammar or like normal curriculum stuff, because they have all the time to do that once they get into primary school. Whereas right now they want to focus more on the kid learning how to socialize, how to immerse in social environment where there's different groups and all, which is going to happen within a year's time. So it's very different.
Yeah, it's very different. It's not 100% a bad thing, I find, because I think that, like, you know, if you look at kids, they're going to start school from standard 1 until, say, form 5 or even form 6. You're looking at 12, 13 years of education, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that having children, I mean, and what we do know about child development is that they do learn better through play in the early years. So I think that there is some room for that. On the flip side, I've had, families who bring their children to come and see me because kindergarten teachers have complained that 3-year-olds can't do 3 hours worth of written work. And that is, I think, ridiculously excessive.
Wait, sorry. You're talking about over here?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Over here, I've had families come to me because the kindergarten teacher complained that their 3-year-old child can't sit still to do karangan for
He's
3
3.
hours. Exactly. So, I hear that and I go, so I think that there is definitely some benefit to having more play base. I think that some schools do take it a little bit too far and expect too much academically of 3-year-olds and 5-year-olds.
Yeah.
But then not at the same time, not teaching them structure will inevitably make them struggle when standard 1 comes and all of a sudden structure exists.
They're slower in a different field, but they excel so much more in other fields.
Yes.
Like, for example, when the kids were 3 years old, right? I was in the 3-year-old room, and teacher is doing show and tell, which they have every year every week or so. The kids, surprisingly to me, they were fighting to be the first ones to go
present first.
Yes, to present. And I think back to when I was in primary school, right? Not even kindergarten, because there was no science of show and tell during kindergarten. And I think about the first time I had to stand in front of class and talk. I was about 10. So teacher would give us an assignment, some moral assignment.
Yep.
And being 10 years old, standing in front of class, I was terrified.
Of course, yeah.
Of course, because it's something that I haven't done before. But compared to the 3-year-olds in let's say the Australian-based education program, so different.
Yes.
Yeah. So pros and cons, right?
Definitely, yeah. So I think that there's a difference. You're seeing a lot of kids who are a lot better with public speaking, a lot better with sharing ideas. They ask a lot more questions. I remember even just being a university student in Australia and having,
Yeah. I noticed that immediately.
And then, and even having like teachers like ask me like, so what are your thoughts? And I wouldn't know what to say because our education system.
I'm taught not to have thoughts.
Yes, my thought is to, what do you want me to say? And that was quite, I think shocking being, 18, 19 years old and having that experience. But we're now seeing kids who have an earlier introduction to that kind of doing better. So yeah, I think there are definite pros and cons to that.
One thing I noticed, right, because I went to university, RMIT, that's in Melbourne, with this mindset that it's quite bad to say this, but I was thinking like Asian kids are just smarter. I literally thought that. And when you are in uni, right, you notice that in the lecture halls, the white kids, they're very I guess this doesn't determine if they're smarter or what, but they're so outspoken that it makes you feel like a bit intimidated because they're always prepared with questions. They're up as compared to let's say an Asian student. She might be very smart and up to date with all the lectures and stuff, but she's not gonna voice out as much. Yeah. So she talked. The students would always be asking questions, sitting in front of class, and then that's when I realized like, it's not the stereotype that I thought, which is they're not as smart.
No.
That's very bad to think that. Yeah. Okay, let me ask you Katyana. So how did you end up being a child psychologist? Have you always wanted to be?
I've always wanted to work with kids and I always wanted to help kids. And I think growing up in Malaysia, the only way I thought I could do that was to be a pediatrician. Right? Go to medical school, be a doctor, be a pediatrician.
What is a pediatrician?
So that's a child doctor, right? Okay, so if you're like under 18, you would go and see a pediatrician versus a GP most of the time. So that's kind of what I wanted to do. But then I thought, again, the only way was to go through medical school. So I applied so we both went to Trinity, I understand. So in Trinity, you have to declare your first course of preference when you enroll.
Science for you, right?
Yes. So I wanted to apply to the MBBS program, which is the medical school program. So it's the Bachelor of Medicine, Bachelor of Surgery. So I applied for that. So I registered as a MBBS prospective student at Trinity. And then but to do the MBBS, you only had, I think there was only 2 prerequisite subjects in addition to the compulsory stuff like English and all that. But the 2 subjects we had to do were math and chemistry. But Trinity required that we did 3. So I had a spare, and I thought I would do bio because I did bio here. But a friend of mine, bless him, talked me into going to the intro lecture for
Yeah,
psych.
I remember they had... Okay.
They have intro lectures for all the subjects, right?
Yeah, I remember.
So he dragged me and to see it. And I don't know whether this person is still there, but the psych professor at the time just completely got my attention. She spent the whole hour talking about cows or something ridiculous, and it was just hilarious.
Yeah.
And I thought this is going to be a fun subject to fill up my time. Fast forward about 1 term into Trinity, I was doing better at psych than I was in all the medical subjects. And my psych professors, so the psych lecturer and tutor sat me down and said, I think you should consider swapping your course preference because the fact that you're currently like not flexing, but I was top of the class for psych, more than the kids who were applying for psych. And so they said, you should consider this as a future. I was stubborn, didn't listen. So the compromise, because I'd been, I think, influenced by the whole, there's no future for psych in Malaysia, you're just gonna...
What? Do people say that?
Well, back then it was more of a conversation than now, for sure. But it was more like,
right.
there is no future for psychologists unless you want to work in places like Tanjung Rambutan or be a school counselor or work in HR.
Try being a stand-up comedian.
Is Tanjung Rambutan hiring right now?
Well, from what I can tell, yes. They are doing very, very well. I actually happen to know people doing their training there.
Right.
Yeah. So, but it was just very much a polarizing thing that was communicated back then. So, of course, when I brought it up with my family, they were just like, we don't know anything about it. We can't tell you whether you should, but just be mindful of whether you're going to be employable. So I was very much influenced by that. So I decided compromise. I ended up doing a Bachelor of Science instead. Because realistically, I was not going to get into medical school. It's like 97%. Yeah, no, that was ridiculous. So I did a Bachelor of Science, majoring in psychology. And in Australia, you have the option to move to medicine after your bachelor's and do it as a postgrad. So if I wanted to do medicine, I still could. So it was kind of like a compromise. So I did a BSc, majored in psych. By the time I graduated, I was like, I'm done with medicine. I want to do psych for the rest of my life. So I did psych, and then in Australia, you needed to have minimum 4 years of psychology study before you can move on to master's or so on. So I did a 3-year bachelor's, and then I did a 1-year postgraduate diploma in psychology. So that rounded it up to 4 years. And then I went to do my master's in London.
Another year.
So I did a master's in health psychology because I liked being sort of in the medical side of things. So I kind of found a way to marry the 2 halves of what I liked, which was medicine and psych. So yes, I did that. And then, I was...
what about the children part?
So the thing with child psych is it's not a...
It's not a specific course that you have to go
Yes,
through?
thank you. So it's not like a specified pathway.
No.
Things like clinical psych, organizational psych, they have their pathways. But child psych is kind of in between. So most people who get into child psych either do it via developmental psychology, educational psychology, or clinical psych. Those are the common pathways. And then you kind of get additional trainings to kind of support your child focus. So I did it via health, which I know is a bit atypical. I've done additional certifications in cognitive behavior therapy, CBT, for children and adolescents. I did internships only in pediatric fields. So it's kind of a bit of a DIY direction compared to, but the more typical is a lot of the people I know do it via education or developmental side.
So you got back here after your master's?
Yes.
And then you specifically looked for jobs treating children?
Yes. So I was a little bit, I would say, self-conscious about it because in Malaysia, I came home with a master's, and back then there were there was no regulations. So they were like, you have a master's in psych, congratulations, you're a psychologist. But in my head, I'm like, I don't feel anywhere near as qualified. I don't have enough experience in my mind at the time. So I made the personal decision not to work as a psychologist at the start. I got about 3 years additional training on my own before I started working as a psychologist.
What do you mean by additional training?
So I worked underneath people who
Internship,
were already
something like that?
I was an assistant. Yeah, I got paid.
Okay. Yeah.
So I was an assistant therapist in my first role. So I was lucky enough to work under someone who was a special education needs educator.
Yeah.
She had 25 years in experience when I arrived.
Yeah, that's great.
And had taught herself how to do a lot of the academic assessments that we now use within sort of the professional world. Because remember, back 25 years ago in Malaysia, there was not very much going on by way of mental health and supporting kids with learning issues.
Not just Malaysia, actually.
Yeah.
Right? The whole world.
In the whole world. So I think she was... So I did that for like a solid year. And then from that place, I moved on to another... clinic center that was working with special needs kids.
Yep.
So I just kind of did that for about 2-3 years before I felt comfortable calling myself a psychologist, even though I had the credentials. I was just kind of like, I don't feel like I have the stripes yet, which kind of puzzled a lot of people. So I did that.
I want to say it's interesting that you don't have to have hands-on experience working with children to be a child psychologist, right?
Well, the good news is that is changing now. So Malaysia has made some very big changes with regards to qualifying psychologists and people who work in this field, which has been great. There's still some things that need to be tweaked here and there, but back then, so this was 2012, it felt like people wanted me to be a psychologist before I wanted to be a psychologist.
That's basically what it was, right?
Yeah.
And it's I think you probably took the better route,
I think it was more because I felt like I didn't want to... I couldn't live with myself if I did something that would harm a child. And I felt that I had a lot of theoretical knowledge, but not as much practical. So I chose to do that for 2-3 years before I
guess it's something to do with maybe the lack of supply of people in your profession.
Absolutely. There's about 10 of us currently in the whole country that...
What?
Yes.
No, what?
Yeah, psychologists, there are about 10 to 15, I would say. Psychiatrists add to the number, but overall...
Psychiatrist is the one that are able to prescribe...
yes, correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So when you add the psychiatrist with the
You're
psychologist...
not psychiatrist?
No,
okay.
no.
Yeah.
So all in all, I would probably estimate less than 30 of us.
Wait, what? So there are 10 child psychologists in Malaysia?
By my estimate, by my last calculation, there was about 10 of us,
And would you say most of them are in KL?
Yes.
What?
It was a very small community,
Like, stand up.
You do know everyone eventually, right? Like,
True.
So we are a very small community, we...
Young? Old?
A bit of both. So there are a couple of them who've been around before I have and are extremely sort of qualified and well respected in the field. But there are some sort of coming out at the moment. And so there's about, I would say 10. The last time I checked, there was about 10 of us who work solely with younger children. So a lot of adult psychiatrists and psychologists have started kind of lowering their age group so that they could start working with teenagers, but very few of them will work with anyone under 15. So once you have a child who is under 15, they need to go and see someone who specifically works with children.
Okay, this was the next thing I wanted to ask. So when you say child psychologist, right? Like, how old is the range?
So officially under 18. So
that's not this. So you're considering teenagers.
So anyone that would
not know that
legally considered child. So it's child and adolescent psychologist, basically.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we would legally work with anyone under 18. But anyone who's in this field will tell you that we have to pull it sort of slightly higher because of the short supply. So
what do you mean by slightly higher?
So my oldest client is about late 20s.
He's not a child anymore.
Not a child anymore by any measure.
Yes.
But I think it's just because the other options are maybe a little older in terms of my colleagues.
Yeah.
So they feel, especially women. So the option in my hospital, for example, my colleague, who I love to death, but my colleague is 62. He's a male.
Yeah.
So that's two options you have currently full time at my hospital. So 20-something-year-old women might feel more comfortable coming to me than going to see him just because of that.
And you want to tell people which hospital you were at?
I'm at Pantai Hospital, KL, in Bangsa.
Okay, how long have you been there?
6 years. Yes, 6 years, turning 7 years in April.
So basically 6 years is after you decided that you're ready to be a psychologist yourself.
So I've been home 10 years. So the first 4 years was just me being
assistant.
an assistant for for about 2.5 to 3 years, and then I was a psychologist, but focusing more on sort of the education side of things. So I wasn't doing very much CBT. I was doing
What
more
is CBT?
cognitive behavior therapy. So it's a type of therapy approach. It's one of the most effective for kids, which is why I chose it. And it helps people kind of identify distorted patterns of thinking in the way they view things. So unlike counseling, which is very much someone providing you with the platform to work through your challenges, it's quite in my opinion, there's no structure with counseling, very little at least. And so if you have a client who is there very much, I need to fix my problems, very motivated, you're going to have a wonderful time. But when you have a lot of clients, like when you work in the field that I'm in, who are there against their will because they've been dragged by parents or teachers or whatever, they are not going to be the pilot of their journey. So when you are expecting them to kind of put the groundwork in, you don't get very far. Whereas with CBT, there's a little bit more of a framework. So there's a template almost that you have to guide your client through. And that template will hopefully give them the scaffolding for future problems. So you may come to me today about your relationship problems, but the template will work for your work problems, for your family problems. And so it gives the client the ability to kind of like navigate things in the future.
Right. But do you refer them to as client or patient or?
So we call them clients. Because it's just that, as I think within MOH right now, they feel that because we're not doctors, we shouldn't call them patients. So I call all of them clients. I'll call them my kids a lot of the time, but clients.
Yeah, kids that are 28.
Yeah, 28. Or not very much younger than me if I think about it. So they're my kids, but
still younger though.
Yeah. That's actually my cutoff. I don't work with anyone older than me.
Okay.
That was my cutoff. When I started seeing the ages rise when I joined Pantai,
then you realize it's weird.
I told them, like, I can't give you advice if you've lived longer than I have. So my cutoff is my age. So for now, it's going to be 34. Next year, it's going to be 35.
What's the oldest you've
What's the oldest client?
Client.
I've ever worked with? So my colleague who I mentioned, he was on leave and he had to send me a client that didn't stay with me for obvious reasons. So he was 52-year-old gentleman who came to see me, did one session, spoke to me and said, "I'm so sorry, but you're my daughter's age." At the time, I was in my 20s. So it's like, "You're my daughter's age. I can't." And I was like, I totally respect that. So I did it once. And then after that, I was like,
Did you tell him, like, you the one that picked me?
He didn't have a choice, to be fair. There was only me and my colleague we're the only two resident psychologists.
And she's around your
there.
age as well.
And no, so we've recently hired, so the psychology team at Pantai is now 4 people. Psychology, psychiatry is another 10.
Wait, you're talking about child psychologists?
No. Okay. For psychologists in total, Pantai has 4.
And you mentioned to me before that your hospital, there's only 1 person in your role, right?
Yes, me.
Which makes sense. It makes sense because there's only 10 in the whole...
So
That's so insane. I still cannot bring that.
I mean, just with regards to like mental health professionals, Malaysia's really short staffed. So that's why whenever I have people, students come to me and say, "Oh, my course guidance counselor said that there's no future in psychology," I want to travel there and strangle people, which I know is not good, but
who said that to you? Sorry.
So there was like a university student from, I can't remember which university, had come to me and was asking for my advice on whether she should pursue psychology. And I said, "What makes you think you shouldn't?" And they said, "Well, the career guidance counselor said that there's really no future." Same thing like HR, or not to say that HR is a bad profession, but just there's a lot of trivializing the whole mental health industry, I think, at the academic level. So a lot of, and which is upsetting because you are so crucial in graduating the next generation, but you're telling them that there's no future. So so I was quite annoyed by that. But we are so understaffed, and I think the problem as well is that this is probably going to get me into trouble, but the problem as well is that
love it.
a lot of hospital administrators don't recognize what's really happening because they're kind of hovering at that level. So there's a lot of demand for medical professionals, but if you apply to any hospital for a mental health role, they will often say there's no space, there's no budget, it's not a priority. So you often get hit with this roadblock. So I always tell students, be stubborn, keep pushing. The minute you get your foot in the door, however that might be, you're going to realize just how much we actually need the people.
the thing is, a hospital, assuming they just run like any other business, right?
Yes.
The moment they see money coming in from having a psychologist, they're gonna be open to that role. right?
Absolutely, but I think at the end of the day, we are limited by how much we can charge. There is a going rate, right? So what we charge per client or per session is not going to compare to what a cardiothoracic surgeon charges for
Of course.
a procedure. So because of that, I think psych
Oh, okay.
does tend to not be a priority. But I am blessed that I work in a hospital
Not a
with
priority, but would you rather have it or not have it?
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. So I'm like I said, I'm pretty happy. I'm pretty blessed that where we are, it is a priority. So the team has grown. So we now have 4 people. So it's kind of nice that there's more of us.
I think this is probably just something that will get so much more relevant in years to come.
especially with the pandemic.
Especially, with older, like let's say people who are in the industry that are from a different time.
Yes.
It also takes time for people to adapt to change, right? Yeah, and this is what's more relevant.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you yourself, you notice over the years, you probably have more and more patients coming in.
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
Yeah,
I think it's grown at a pretty ridiculous rate. I think since
Ridiculous.
Yeah.
A lot of influencers, perhaps.
Yes.
A lot.
Yes. I think with COVID, it was actually quite scary because we did the math within my department and we saw a 400% jump in client flow during the MCO.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. And I mean, it's slowed down a little, but I think it's just the pandemic has opened up this whole world to people that that mental health is a really important thing. So I think so and it's great because I'm hearing a lot more people going into psychology now. A lot more people are coming out to practice. So yeah, there has been some benefit, I think, to the craziness that we've just survived the last few years. But yeah.
So yeah, speaking about just now I mentioned like influencer clients, right? I first of all I prepared everything for. So I assume that your clients are 5-year-olds.
No.
Yeah. So yeah, there's actually so much more to talk about.
Okay.
Yeah. So tell me how we are living in such different times that you are attached to your phone all the time.
Yes.
You are on social media. People's opinions are heard everywhere, and then it affects you. How has that affected people's like teenagers, your clients?
I think it's just opened up a whole world. It's a completely uncharted territory, right? Because you are so connected, almost unhealthily so, to the world at the tip of your fingers, right? And so private struggles are no longer private. And then of course you add to, what you just described is probably one of the biggest things that I deal with at work is just the impact of social media on teen mental health.
Yeah.
That's it. That's like my day.
That's like 90% of all your cases, right?
And I say teens, but it's affecting kids as young as a parent would give them a phone. So I've got 10-year-olds coming in with body image issues. I don't remember
But that's
knowing
funny
anything.
because how do you think they are getting feedback on their body? Like, they're not on social media, right?
They
just
are. So
at
that's
10.
the thing. Yeah. So that's the
What
thing.
apps?
Well, that's the thing. A lot of them are lying about their age to open. There's not much of a verification process
Of
to
course.
lie about your age to open up an account. So a lot of them would open up an account or use their parents' accounts to scroll. And so they are being exposed to the internet. And I think a lot of parents, because that was not what was going on when we were 10, don't think about it.
Not at all,
I
man.
see just that off topic, but just 2 weeks ago, there was the baby expo in Mid Valley, and then I was there with my husband buying stuff for the baby, and we were queuing up, and there was a kid who was still in a stroller. So imagine a child who is still small enough to be in a stroller, no more than probably about 4 years old, on TikTok.
He's swiping you, basically.
Yeah,
Oh,
I don't even
dear.
have a TikTok, but the kid was just there on TikTok. I don't know if he had an account, but clearly knows how to navigate TikTok.
Oh, dear.
And dad was standing next to him, but on his own device, not paying attention to what the son was viewing. And so I think that there is not enough supervision for kids on social media, and that's just because I think a lot of parents don't understand social media the way that this generation does. And so because of that, you're seeing a lot of kids exposed to, especially these 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds who are exposed to things like body image issues, and then because jumping into the concept of sort of just how developed their brains are, they're not going to be able to rationalize and process it the same way we adults do. We might go, well, that's so clearly photoshopped, or that's so clearly edited.
Filtered.
These kids are not going to think that.
Right. I feel that dad was supervising his kid through the TikTok.
Possibly, but I think when we talk about screen time as well, like all of the guidelines we have say that it needs to be supervised screen time, but that's not something that parents do. They give a kid the tablet and and off you go. And I can understand how difficult it is to, I'm speaking from experience, just how difficult it is to remove technology from a child's life. My 4-month-old already knows where the screens are. So even though even though I don't let her watch anything, all I have to do is to have her on the mat in front of me, and I very casually glance on my phone. Her eyeballs are on the screen, and that's purely because she recognizes light. She recognizes the stimulation. And so it's so difficult to remove technology from our kids' lives, right? Even when the grandparents call, they want to video call, my kid has a screen in her face. So I appreciate the challenge, but I think that social media has just opened that whole thing, and we're seeing a lot of teenagers really struggle with the standards that social media has communicated about life, or how life should be, and then that impacts their mental health.
I just thought about something, so it might not be related, but imagine animals, pets, right? They are very well aware of being recorded and stuff like that. Maybe they have mental health issues.
In Australia they actually had pet therapists. I don't know if you saw it, but inside in Melbourne, because we were where we were.
I would love to hear about that.
There was actually, I remember coming across, like when I took my cat to the vet, there was like an ad for a pet psychologist if you felt that your pet was depressed or anxious. So there is an actual thing for that. I don't really fully understand it, but there is a thing.
The first thing you would think about is just the communicating part, right? The message.
But somehow it's a real thing.
Your dog might be thinking, oh, this other dog, it just looks so much prettier all the time. He's well groomed most of the time compared to myself.
I'm convinced that animals are a lot smarter than human beings think that they are, so I wouldn't be surprised.
I've always looked at a dog as maybe they're just like 4-5-year-old human. I've always looked at them that way. Love animals, so it depends if you're that type of person. Okay, so there's a lot of we know about all the negatives of social media, but honestly, you're a kid growing up 10 years ago or 20 years ago, they're not going to be as smart as they are growing up right now, like not even close. There was this thing that we were talking about in previous episode. There's this saying, old people are wiser. You can't use that term anymore. It doesn't make any sense. Back then, your form of information transfer is through books, scriptures, Now it's coming at you at all directions from all countries, unlimited exposure. So a lot of things has changed, there is a lot of pros as well.
Absolutely. I think that there's a lot that you're opening up a world that you could never access without. Look at, just reflecting back on my grandparents' time, it was snail mail, right? That was the only way that you could communicate with people outside your community. I don't even know what snail mail. Just regular post,
snail's the right term for it.
So it was regular post, right? And then then it became email and things like that. But we've never been more connected as a species or as a race as we are now, and our kids are being exposed to so many things on the internet, and that can be very, very educational and very, very powerful, but also very, very damaging, right? So I think that as much as there are pros there, I think the important thing is that parents have to remember that they still have to be able to keep their kids, especially the young ones, as protected from the dark stuff as they can.
So okay, let's talk about this then, because this is going to be very tricky, and a lot of parents have very different beliefs or attitudes towards how they're going to restrict their kids' time on let's not say social media, let's just say iPads. Okay. What type of advice would you give?
There are very strict guidelines actually online, set by the American Association of the American Pediatrics have American Association of Pediatrics, and they've indicated like sort of how many hours a child's supposed to be exposed, and that's a general guideline. So in Pantai, my colleagues
Can I get an example? Like how many hours?
This actually shocks a lot of people. So in Pantai, for example, our guideline is that for children under the age of 2, they should get nothing at all, no TV, and TV is also considered a screen, which
I'm not gonna argue with that.
yeah,
I
which a
think
lot
so,
of
right.
parents are quite shocked by, because I think sadly, if we go out now, you'll see a lot of very young children with a device in front of them just to eat meals and things like that.
Of course.
So previously it was like 2 hours. It was nothing prior to 2, and then up to the age of 5, it was 30 minutes supervised.
50 minutes, okay.
Yeah, 30 minutes supervised. So what that means is your child can be watching cartoons or watching something on an iPad or a TV, but you are required to be there to engage the child while they're watching it, because what happens is the screen talks at you.
Yep.
So you'll have a lot of kids who might have very great vocabulary but won't know how to have two-way conversations, because the screen doesn't have two-way conversations with you. So what we would like is for parents to actually kind of engage the child while they're watching, be like, oh, look, how many cows do you see in the cartoon? And do things like that, so that the child is not just plainly watching. So that's up till 5, and then I think from 5 to 10, if I believe, or 5 to 9, it goes up to an hour, and so on and so forth. So I think they said for up to 15, we're looking at no more than 3 or 4 hours. I can't remember the guideline.
15 years old.
Yeah. And I think no 15-year-old I know sticks to that timing, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I try to be very gentle when I talk to parents about it, because often when I do, they get very defensive, and they're like, oh, but you know how difficult it is. I'm like, I know how difficult it is. So I'm of the belief that, like, if your child is functioning well, meaning your child isn't presenting with any speech or social skill issues,
Yeah.
or your child is not having any issues with their vision, or basically if your child is functioning well, do what you what you'd
Let
like
them
to
do
do.
what they
Yeah,
do.
do what you are comfortable with as a parent, but you still need to regulate, right? And so if you find it difficult to regulate within your capacity, there are now apps that help you do that. So Google came up with a really cool one over the pandemic called Google Family Link, and what that does is that it actually regulates your child's access to certain apps based on timing or based on duration. So you as a parent can actually see how long they're spending on these apps, and B, restrict it if need be. So some parents just turn off the Wi-Fi, but others can use this to say, like, well, you can have access to certain sites if you have homework, but things like Instagram or Facebook, they won't be able to turn on if it's outside of those windows. So those are things that I tell parents. The other thing I tell parents is that if your child really likes being connected on their iPad, then use it as an incentive, right? So sort of like a reward system, if you will, right?
Yeah.
So your child can earn X number of minutes for doing certain tasks that they would otherwise not want to do. Chores or homework,
yeah.
or like I have one family that said that if they can read a book, right? If they
that's
can read a
brilliant.
book, so it's trade, right? Read
Yeah.
a book, earn an extra 30 minutes on your device. And kids are doing it. So I think that it's something that we don't necessarily have to remove. I tell parents, when you're trying to incentivize your children, think of what their currency is. A lot of parents think that it's money. A lot of parents think that, oh, if I punish my child, but those might not be things that your child values. Therefore, it's not their currency. They're not going to be working for something that they don't believe in, right? So if a child is invested in their screen time, and you want to regulate their screen time, then you can use that to your advantage.
Children pick up all sorts of things from like watching TikTok. Just for example, right, my nephew the other day, I heard him laughing, and he said, "Ha, I'm a lesbian." And I asked him, like, where do you find that from? Like, where do you hear about that word? He's only 6, and he's like, I know, it's racist. Like, no, it's not racist.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it's just they just throw random words, based on
Yeah.
whatever they listen to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing, because it's not age appropriate. There's no age filter on social media. And so, like,
Can I ask, okay, so apart from using iPads in general, what is your advice for the right age, not right, or maybe just a guideline for an age that you think it's okay for kids to get on social media, which is like Instagram and those stuff?
I'm sort of,
Have an account themselves, I mean.
I would probably say, like, account unsupervised, probably like 16. Account supervised, you can probably start at like 13, so like high school or secondary school. Anything less than that, I really feel that they shouldn't have their own account. They shouldn't be on it like without supervision. So when I say account unsupervised, means you kind of trust that your child knows how to use social media responsibly. But when they're 12 or 13, even 16-year-olds don't have the adequate neurological maturity to be able to do that, but it's better than a 12-year-old. So when I have parents, allow their kids to have Instagram or Facebook accounts at 12, and they know their kids lie about the age to get bypass that requirement.
The kids even know the technology better than their parents. So they're gonna get away with things.
Exactly.
You hear often, parents will be like, "Oh my god, I just found out my kid has another account that she didn't tell me about." And the whole time the parents think that they're following the kid on Instagram.
Yes.
But it's a fake account.
And that's the thing. You need to be, my question to parents is, if you don't understand something fully, why unleash your child onto it? So if you are going to, say you're not a very tech savvy person, but you want to allow your child to go onto Instagram and stuff, do the research, acclimatize yourself or educate yourself on social media so that you know how to confront problems when you have them. The problem is that a lot of parents don't get it. They call themselves, they're quite happy to say that, I'm a bit of a tech dinosaur, I don't really understand this. Fair. But then you are putting your child onto it, right? So, I've had moments very much like that where parents will tell me, I follow my child on Instagram, I know what he or she is doing.
Or so I thought.
And then I had a moment where coincidentally, another client of mine was friends with this particular child, and they'd seen each other in the corridor. So they didn't know that I was seeing both of them. But then, because I didn't know they were friends either, they don't go to the same school, I didn't make the connection, but they know each other somehow. And then they'd pass each other in the corridor. And the second child who I saw had said to me, did you see what she posted yesterday? And I don't follow these kids on social media. So I was like, no. And so my client shows me, and there's a separate account, secret account with a lot of very worrying things on there.
Oh dear.
And parents had no idea. So I think that's kind of the thing, lah. Like parents, you kind of need to know what your kids are doing.
Okay, so you would know, because back in my time, right, it's so different in high school, right? And you know that even back then, during my time, it was blogs and a little bit of Facebook, the type of stuff. I heard that right now, cyberbullying has gotten so bad, especially with Instagram. They can just leave a comment and all of your friends are going to see it. And then for a kid then, maybe when you're older, you're more mature, you start to realize that the people in the comments are typically, it's just not a nice place, right? So you understand that people say bad shit. But for a kid, it might be their first few times experiencing something like that, and it's going to fuck with their brain.
Absolutely. There's a lot of stuff that parents don't realize is happening. You're right. Cyberbullying is like a really big issue. There was something that was going on last year which really, really bothered me. I can't remember the name of it, but there was this app, or there was this extension on one of the social media apps that kids were able to basically write anonymous comments about this particular account holder. So you would get that was a huge platform for cyberbullying because there was no accountability. It was completely anonymous. And so imagine just opening up your page. Basically. So it was like there would, you would have your account, and then people could come on and anonymously say whatever they wanted to say about you, and then leave with no trail. And a lot of people, I think a lot of teenagers thought that it was like a fun thing, but I worked with a lot of teenagers who would get really, really upsetting bullying type things on these sites, and get really upset by it because they don't know. And then they would be obsessively trying to figure out who it was, because they're like, it has to be somebody who's one of my friends, because how else would they know? So I think that, cyberbullying has just gone up like crazy, because I think that social media has provided these bullies with the anonymity.
Yes.
There's no accountability.
Accessibility too.
Yes, accessibility as well. And I think there's just a lot of bravery that comes from having a screen. That's why trolls exist.
Yeah.
Like people will never, I guess, come up with the bravery
they wouldn't say it to your face. Yeah. They really won't. Most of the all, because I also get some trolls, right? It's all the same. The accounts are just not them.
Yeah.
It's just, you're following 1,000 accounts, but then you have like 10 followers. It's a fake account.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how much time are you wasting doing that?
I think a lot of these people, someone should look into the science of trolls, but I think a lot of these people are also very, very unhappy or distressed.
For sure, they know it as well.
Yeah. And so the beauty of social media and having the screen kind of provide you with that false sense of protection, it gives them a lot of courage that they might not have had in their real life, right?
Let me ask you this. So you speak to a lot of your clients that are facing the bullying, but what about the ones that are doing the bullying? I'm sure you've had to have... You speak with those as well.
Of course.
And they admit it to you. And do you ask them why it happens and stuff?
Of course. I mean, we try to kind of get them to explore why, but oftentimes the why is an uncomfortable reality that they don't want to experience. Most people who are bullies today were bullied at some point. So it's sort of an unending chain of abuse in a way.
Trauma passed down,
exactly. So a lot of them are doing it because they feel like it's the only way they can exert control, because there are other elements of their life they can't feel in control with. So it could be that they have difficult relationships at home, they could be struggling socially, financially. So it's their way of feeling powerful, right? And so with teenagers, empathy is also something that's not fully developed. So that's kind of why it becomes a big issue. So we work a lot on sort of picking you up and putting you in a different pair of shoes. And teenagers are often very, very receptive, and they often get the light bulb goes off and you can see it when they recognize
that they're being a dick.
Yeah, because they really don't see it that way. They see it from a very different perspective. So when we do things to kind of have them go like, I recognize the emotion that I am eliciting in my quote unquote victims, and when they recognize that, it's often really disturbing for them.
It is.
So so that's kind of usually a lot of what we do. We're not in a position to judge and tell you it's wrong. I'm sure you know it's wrong. It's more sort of just making sure that you understand the consequences of your actions and whether you're okay with that. And most of the time they're not. So.
It's like that saying, hurt people, right? This is so relevant if you are a parent right now and you've got kids in the teen years, right? Bullying is I would say every teen would go through at least some form of bullying, or probably been the bully themselves, no matter depending how severe it is or what. One thing I wanted to talk about also, and I've started to realize, I wanted to talk about beating your children, right? The psychological effects that it's going to have on them, the trauma. And I've started to realize, maybe parents don't have to beat their kids anymore. They're just, they tell their kids, you know what? If you don't do your homework or you fuck up, you broke something, you're not going to use Instagram or Wi-Fi. It's kind of changed, right? The disciplinary methods.
There's been so much research that's gone into corporal punishment. I think all of us is physical punishment, so smacking your kids, basically. All of us, I think anyone who's in our age bracket we've all been exposed to that form of parenting, right? And it's funny because my husband's European, and so he's like
the opposite.
You guys beat your kids here, and I'm like, no, we don't beat our kids here, but
our
it's just that
beat us.
But corporal punishment was a lot more socially acceptable in this region versus that region, I feel. But I think that so much research has gone into it because they have found that kids who were raised with physical punishment often resorted to physical punishment with their children, often struggled with more, aggressive behaviors. It basically, the research came back where it wasn't always the picture was not that nice of what the outcome was. And so it kind of shifted towards, okay, well, how else do we communicate to kids what is right and wrong and what they should do and what they shouldn't do? And so that goes back to what I mentioned earlier about currency, right? So I have this funny story about, I say funny, but it's actually not that funny. It's about this family that had a young child. I would say probably about 6 or 7 years old. And dad was very much a believer in corporal punishment. So he would belt the children or smack them,
give it
hangers, typical sort of everything appliance you can find in the house kind of approach.
Dad probably drank a lot too.
Don't know. We never went down that road. But there was a lot of physical punishment. But the thing was, the child never responded. So the child would often still continue doing what the dad was unhappy with, despite getting a proper beating. And dad would come to me and say, there's something wrong with my child because, I've beaten him till he's bled.
Wait, you're talking, your client said that to you?
No, the client's parent had come to me and said, there's something wrong with my child. Yeah. And said, like, there's, I've beaten him quite severely. And of course, I'm biting my tongue because I feel very strongly about
you want to shout at him, like, are you fucking stupid?
Yeah, but you kind of can't say those words out loud, even though you might think it. So he said that there's something wrong with my child because he's still not responding. He's still quote unquote misbehaving, even though I punish him.
Yeah.
And so the thing is, because beating him was no longer his currency. He gets it so often.
Yeah.
It's no longer something that he worries about, right?
Yeah.
And it's no longer something that he really cares too much about. Like beat lah, I kena every day anyway, So that became the thing. So I think a lot of parents believe that beating your child is the ultimate punishment and that all kids will respond. That's not the case. So you got to understand your child's currency. So if it is the internet, use it.
I feel like maybe it's because so I got caned as well when I was young. Did you?
Not at home, but my teachers were a big fan of public caning.
Oh, okay. I think it's different when your teachers cane you compared to your parents.
Yeah.
It is a different experience.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like it doesn't take much to realize that you're gonna see a lot of people, some that were beaten and some that weren't beaten. It's not gonna determine whether that person turns out to be a great human being or not.
No.
It just doesn't relate that way.
No.
The way I see it is, it's a lack of discipline for the parent because the parent is giving in to that temptation of it is really releasing stress, hitting your kids. It is. Okay. There is, you feel guilty, sure, but you also release stress at the same time hitting them. You go. I go to the gym and I hit the bag, the heavy bag. It's the same thing. I release stress. You're beating your kids. People who beat their wives.
I think, I tell people, like, you got to think about the message you're sending, right? Because if you're hitting your child in anger, and then they always come to me and they get surprised why the child beats them when their child's angry. And I say,
sorry, what
so like I've got a lot of cases, and it's actually been shown in research that children who were beaten are often also aggressive when they're unhappy. And parents will come to me and be like, I don't understand, why does my child hit me? And I'm like, do you hit your child? And they're like, yeah, but that's because they misbehave. And I'm like, but what message are you sending? You're sending the message to your child that when I am unhappy, I have the right to lay a hand on you.
Yeah.
So what are they going to take away from that? That when I'm unhappy, I have the right to lay a hand on you or someone else too. So I think that's some of the thing that parents don't remember, right? Because I think in Asia very much we focus on that hierarchy where I'm the parent and you have to respect me. But the respect is often not a two-way street. And so when they don't focus on how they need to conduct themselves in a respectful way, they just feel that by bringing a child into this world, they've earned the right to be on a different level to these little humans. And I don't really believe in that.
So bullshit.
It is, because you are responsible. I mean, now being a mom myself, like I think about how the fact that how I treat my daughter is going to teach her about how she should be treated and how she can treat other people.
Yeah.
Your relationship with your child is the first relationship they are ever going to have with another human being. And so if you feel that when I've had, and I think the worst ones are when parents are upset about things that have nothing to do with the child. So they've had a stressful day at work, they fought with their partner, whatever it is, and then the child is just a little bit annoying or a little bit difficult, and then they take it out on the child, right? That's worse, because that tells the child that, I can
lash out as well if I need to.
Exactly. So that's a lot of the stuff that I think a lot of parents need to think about. If you're happy to get what you give, then that's your prerogative lah. That's what I think.
Well, then now thinking about it, I think it's actually so much better to lash out on restricting their social media instead of just what do you call it, corporal punishment. Right?
It's, you really need to take the time to understand your child. So some kids it's social media, some kids it's time, right? So it could be privileges like hanging out with their friends or hanging out with you, right? So they might look forward to certain activities or sports they can do with you, and then because of that you'd be like, okay, because you were rude today, or because you were whatever, we're gonna cancel that outing. It could be that as well. So you have to be able to, one, understand what your child values in terms of a currency. And secondly, you have to be consistent. I don't like this thing, like I said, that parents do. Depends on my mood. If I've had a bad day, I'm going to remove privileges. If I've had a good day or I want to pujok them, I'll give them extra privileges. This inconsistency is what's going to ensure they're going to not follow through.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of rules that parents themselves have to follow if they want to use this sort of system. But
Parents are still, honestly, you know, I've been thinking about this, you know, when you were younger, we would think that adults have all their shit together. That's bullshit.
No.
You know? Then when you get older, you realize, oh, they still don't have a lot of their shit together.
Yep.
And they're learning on the go.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
But
I remember thinking like, oh, you know, being 30, you're such
really
an
thought
adult.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm 34 now. I'm like, no, I don't get it.
Yeah. And it's not gonna stop.
No.
It's you're forever gonna be learning, right?
Yeah.
People always say that.
Yeah.
There's one other thing I want to talk about. So something that's very let's say I think this one, you can be an adult and have it as well, but then for younger children, right, a lot of parents also they sometimes they're in denial, or they don't know how to determine whether or not their children has ADHD. So what are some of the types of ADHDs, and how do they range from like most severe to least severe types?
So there used to be two types of what we used to call ADD and ADHD.
What's the difference?
One is attention deficit disorder. One is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So one has hyperactivity as a component, one doesn't. To make our lives difficult, the clinical community have now merged it into one. ADD no longer exists. They now call it ADHD inattentive, ADHD hyperactive impulsive, or ADHD combined presentation. So there's 3 types of ADHD just to make our lives difficult.
Okay.
So that was an amendment in the DSM-5, which is the guideline that we use. So yes, to
Sorry,
answer...
what is DSM-5? I've been hearing that a lot.
It stands for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders. Or
It
mental
is
health
the
illnesses.
Bible for...
It's the
like
Bible for mental health.
Yeah, got it.
So in the community, we have the DSM-5, so the 5th edition. They keep saying they're coming out with a new one, but the DSM-5 is the latest that we have.
Where can we get that?
So you can buy
Download
it at
it.
any bookstore. You can download it. It's got a lot of technical jargon which you might not fully understand if you don't have the training, but it is basically a guideline that we all use to ensure that no matter where you are in the world, we're all diagnosing things the same way, or we're assessing things the same way. So according to the DSM-5, those are the 3 subtypes of ADHD. The main criteria we look for is, the first thing is inattention or difficulty with focus. So difficulties paying attention. The second one is...
Myself.
a lot of people. The second one is hyperactive behavior. So tends to be, and that can look like anything. A lot of people tend to think like, oh, hyperactive means like running around, bouncing
like
off the
in
walls.
circles and circles.
Yeah,
It's not
but
that.
that need not be the case, right? It could also just be someone who has difficulty following through on tasks because their thoughts constantly bounce from one thing to another. And then finally is impulse control issues. So they tend to act before they think. So that can look like someone who's very clumsy. So they will do something and often get hurt because they will act before they think
Impulsive.
about impulsive.
Yeah.
And some could be more with regards to more riskier behavior. So whether they might engage in things that are just fun but not really safe. So those are the 3 sort of areas of behaviors that we look for, and depending on the severity of each of these behaviors, that will then determine which of the 3 conditions and what severity you land in.
Okay. Would you I mean, you would almost say that every kid is gonna have some sort of level in each of those what do you call that, categories, right?
Yeah.
At least some of that. It's just how severe.
Yeah.
And adults as well.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So then, you think about what are the solutions to it. One obvious solution is people would prescribe drugs, right? That one is also very tricky because then you tell yourself, like, what happens when they are on these drugs long term? Is there a tapering off process? Do the doctors even advise on that? The tapering off stuff, and how long are they going to take it for? So you know that in America is quite a big problem, right?
Yes.
The Adderall issue.
Yes.
So children are taking Adderall because they're being prescribed by the school doctors, and then you're going to be taking this for years and years. So what the Adderall does is it would help your kid to focus.
Yes.
I don't know the science behind it, but yeah, it supposedly helps your kid focus. But what's really, I would say, scary is they would have advertisements of kids showing that a kid is like feeling very zombie-like in school. You know, he just doesn't want to pay attention. He wants to go outside and play. And then sure enough, you give him an ADHD drug, right? What do you call those? Modafinils or there's quite a few. And tada, the kid is now a super student. He's a grade A student and he's the teacher's pet. I think that's very misleading.
Of course.
And very dangerous.
Yeah.
But
it doesn't
money.
work like that. But money.
But money.
It's a very so Adderall is actually banned in Malaysia.
Oh really? I wanted to ask
so
about that.
we don't from what I've been told, it's not available in Malaysia, but the equivalent is Ritalin. So the Ritalin is available here.
Is it a more mild version?
I think it's a slightly different form, so it works in a slightly different way. Ritalin I think has been around longer than Adderall, so it's been worked on a lot more, but you know, the thing is that there is a very, very strong potential for abuse when it comes to both of those things. I think when you put a young child on medication, there's a lot of things that you have to consider. For example, sort of the maturity of the human body, whether their liver can process it in the right way. We're looking at if you're not supervising your children, whether it's going to be a dependency issue. So, you know, I think that's something that I've noticed that's kind of amazing or kind of nice about Malaysian parents, that when it comes to sort of these drugs, they're a lot more hesitant. So that's why parents are trying very hard to do non-drug things before they try the drug route. But that being said, I think, you know, you raised a very good point. A lot of the criteria that's part of ADHD can be seen in normal human behavior, and never more so than in young children, or specifically young boys. And so the potential for misdiagnosis is very high when you're looking at these behaviors if you don't know what to look for. So I, for one, make it a point not to assess anyone under the age of 6. So when I get 2-year-olds diagnosed with ADHD, I do an internal eye roll, because all of those behaviors are age appropriate in a 2-year-old.
It's so horrible to even think of things like, logically you just think like a kid is at the peak of its curiosity of a human being. You're supposed to be super, what do you call it, easily distracted. You're supposed to be, because you're absorbing everything. You want to learn as much as possible. And you know, someone is going to tell you that your kid has ADHD just because you can't pay attention. Well, that's every kid. Right?
I tell parents, I'm more concerned about the kid who sits down quietly and stares at the wall and doesn't want to run around when they're 2 than the one who, you know,
like a
so
zombie.
That kid worries me more than this kid. So I think that that is very much just the adults expecting more from the child than the child should be doing. So when a kid comes to me at 2-3 years old with a complaint that the child is hyperactive, or that the child has already been given a diagnosis of ADHD, I'm always a little wary. So because to me, I'm like, the kits that we use, the assessment tools that we use start at 6. So that has to be for a reason. So where these people are getting their assessment tools from that can claim to diagnose in 2-year-olds, I don't know. But unless the child is extremely severe to the point where he can't make it a whole day without breaking a bone because he's so hyperactive, or he's so inattentive that he's forgetting everything and just really, really cannot function, I find it very, very difficult to diagnose or assess in a child very, very young.
And also, right, I want to ask, like, you mentioned that Adderall is not available in, not prescribed in Malaysia because it's illegal, but is it common for these kids to be getting Ritalin?
I wouldn't say it's common, because in
much less uncommon.
Much less, yeah. Because in Malaysia, you have to be a psychiatrist or a medical doctor to prescribe. So yes, there have been cases where I have found
your clients,
certain clients or some clients obtain medication from non-doctors. I don't know. Illegally. But generally in Malaysia, like even someone like myself who works with children with ADHD, we can't prescribe. So I would say that for that reason, it's a little less of an issue here in terms of abuse. But that being said, it's still something that they have to regulate. So psychiatrists have to regulate.
Essentially, what is, let's say, a ADHD drug? What is it? It's a performance enhancing drug, right? Because it's supposed to help you focus.
Pretty much.
So what it actually does is it's supposed to help you while you're on it. But does it actually help you get better without it?
So like any drug,
Yeah.
what it does is that it treats a symptom, right? So if you were to remove the drug without ensuring that there are other ways to support that system, then of course it's gonna come back.
gonna crash.
So very simply put is like you're diabetic. You need insulin.
Yes.
What does insulin do? It helps remove the sugar from your system, or it regulates your glucose, your blood glucose.
Yep.
But while you're on insulin, you don't watch what you eat, you consume a crap ton of sugar. The minute you come off insulin, your diabetes is going to go back to being not in control,
And
right?
probably even at a more unstable rate.
Precisely. So
Yes.
with Ritalin or even just antidepressants or anti-anxiety meds, for example, if you are on it, the symptoms will be managed. But
Yep.
if you don't make sure that you have a good support system, good learning education, or what we call individualized education plans at school for these children, where they can get the support for their ADHD, you don't ensure that all the things around it work, then the minute you take the medication away, you're
Yep.
going to be back to square one, if not worse.
Yeah, I'm going to give another example. Let's talk about PEDs, steroids, let's say for bodybuilders.
Yeah.
So what happens when you take the steroids? It boosts all your hormones,
Yeah.
so your muscles are able to grow at a superhuman rate,
Yeah.
right? And what happens when you go off of these steroids is not only will your muscles go down, and then your body will start to have problems producing testosterone of its own, like producing sufficient testosterone, because it was so dependent on the steroids already doing the job that now you're lacking that you're not used to producing that amount anymore. So I guess it's the same thing for
It is. So I always tell people, like, if you've been prescribed something and that prescription is allowing you to manage your condition effectively, that's fine. But you have to make sure that there are environmental things that you can do to support your situation or support your condition, so that really good example is the pandemic caused a huge issue in supply chain. So a lot of patients were no longer being given access to medications that we could no longer import if they were not being made here. And the generic stuff wasn't working. So a lot of people were struggling to get medications that they were reliant on. Did
Yeah.
we anticipate that would ever happen? No, right? No one anticipated that we'd be in this position,
Yep.
but it happened. And so the people who relied on those medications, who didn't have a support network, inevitably struggled more than the people who had these supports in place. So I would say if your child is on Ritalin, if your child is on Xanax, if your child is on something that's
children on Xanax. That's
say
insane.
children, but teenagers,
Oh, yeah, okay.
or anything that's, to help with their condition, it is what it is, but you still have to not forget that your child needs to go to therapy, your child needs to have education plans or whatever it is. I think that's a very Asian thing. Like, they assume take the medication, symptom goes away, I don't have to think about it anymore. But you have to make sure you have all this other stuff in place,
I don't think it's only an Asian thing. I think
I
it's
think,
just
out of sight, out of mind.
like
Yeah.
misinformed throughout, all over the world. So a lot of them are having these type of issues. So okay, fine. What's your advice on the best possible way to go about this without let's say go about your kid from let's say at like you mentioned, at the age of 6 you can usually tell what type of ADHD he has. How would you advise parents the best possible way to go about it naturally?
Well, I think the first thing is to find out whether or not your child does have this condition or does have ADHD. So if you have concerns, or if your teachers or your child's teachers have concerns, then the first thing you have to do is to get your child assessed. This will be a process that usually involves working with the school, working with the tutors, because we want to understand how the child functions in every environment. Once we have a very good picture of what the child's struggles are, because remember, no two kids with ADHD will be exactly the same.
Yep.
We want to make sure that we have the right supports in place. So is it about coming up with a schedule and a structure for the child so they don't have to think impulsively? They have a very clear guideline of what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Can we get the school involved to make sure that these plans are also executed at school so that there's continuity of that plan? Is there a way to incorporate more physical activity in their day so they're burning more energy?
Yeah, so important.
I tell parents, like, go and buy one of those cheap Daiso egg timers and have it in your child's room. So whenever you need a child to complete something, use the timer to help the child keep track of time. Because a lot of kids with ADHD struggle with not knowing how much time has passed. So they can either become hyper fixated on something and spend hours and hours doing something that should have taken 10 minutes, or they could kind of just jump onto something else, not realizing that they had this task left to do. So having an egg timer, for example, to remind them that, okay, you're going to be doing this until the timer goes off, okay? Then that will help them remember sort of slots of time, for example. So there's all these things that we can do, but first thing is to figure out how does the ADHD, for example, impact your particular child.
Okay. And children eventually will outgrow this naturally.
I wouldn't say they outgrow, I would say they adapt.
They adapt. So I feel like whatever you just mentioned, the child needs a timer so that he remembers, how to keep track of time and not do something for too long. That's very common thing, a very common trait you see in many adults.
Yeah.
Myself as well. Let's talk about doom scrolling. So that's just an example. You scroll, and you think that you're gonna be on for 10 minutes, but you're there for an hour.
Yep.
Do you believe that even without external help, which is from medication, kids are going to adapt?
Well, I think that it is human nature that we all adapt to things.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think that it depends on the level of struggle, right?
Of course,
right. I feel strongly that, all of us have something that we've all adapted to, whether it's that little tinge of OCD or that little tinge of ADHD. I think we've all adapted to it if it hasn't really impacted our functioning too much. But I think when I say we have to look at the level of severity, because kids who have severe ADHD, for example, yes, they will adapt, but it will be a very, very difficult life. And when they struggle through everything, through school, through friendships, through injuries, through all that, that opens up the door for mental health issues. Because the more the human psyche struggles, the more the likelihood that they will be exposed to things like depression and anxiety. So for me, that's the culprit I want to prevent. So the thing we're noticing now is a lot of people in our age bracket, back when no one really gave a damn too much about whether you had ADHD, everyone is parked as slow learners back in the 90s in KL, right, in Malaysia. So the thing is that those people are now young adults who have looked upon their childhoods as being just so challenging. School was difficult, everything was difficult.
Harder times.
Yes. And so because of that, they're more prone to certain mental health issues now. And that becomes the problem. So I feel, yes, if we ignore it, the child will struggle. Some parents say, it gives them character, it gives them a bit more gumption or strength.
Make them tougher.
More resilient. I mean, sure. But you're gambling on the risk that the struggle takes that negative turn and makes them feel like, why are things so much harder for me than it was for everyone else? And then you deal with depression later on as a concern.
Do you see yourself like writing a book, a guide for parents?
Oh gosh, I've always been too afraid to do that because I'm worried that someone's going to turn around and be like, she's a 34-year-old with no kids up until recently.
Okay.
I've always been quite hesitant to do it, but I mean, I do a lot of workshops to try to engage parents in a conversation about it. And my plan for my PhD is actually to do research on the impact of parenting on child mental health. So for example, like how cultural stigma impacts parental response to a child who has anxiety and things like that. So I think it's important for me to be able to show parents that mental health is something that doesn't, or mental health issues specifically, is not something that just happens to adults. In fact, research has shown that about a quarter of all mental health issues manifest by the time you're 14 and half by the time you're 21. So it is something that has origins from childhood. And so I think the whole, you've got nothing to be upset about when they see little kids who get distressed. I work with so many families who are going through divorce and it's like a difficult thing and their kids are in the middle and parents are like, it doesn't concern them. And I'm like, which part of seeing mom and dad at each other's throats is not going to impact them at some point?
Yeah, of course.
You know?
Fuck them up.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of that, I think, education that I would love to be a part of to help parents understand how the experiences that kids go through now will impact how they view life in adulthood.
Everything.
Yeah. Relationships, everything, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, the next thing I wanted to talk about is children with parents that are separated.
Yeah.
You know, how does it affect them psychologically? Let's say if they're at the age of from 5 and below, you know, and then how do parents go about, you know, how to handle a situation like that? It's very messy.
That's a very personal journey for me because my parents got divorced when I was really little, and one. Yeah, my parents were about I was 1.5 when they got.
Okay.
In your first year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Says something.
How was the arrangement like in
So back then,
households?
back then in Malaysia, the custody, Sharia custody, was very much breadwinner got the children, and so that would have been my dad. And so that involved quite a fair amount of court going back and forth because my mom eventually got custody.
Were you aware of this at that young age?
I was aware of it, I think, from when I started school, and I started
Like
school pretty
primary?
young. No, like kindergarten, because my mom had to start working,
Yeah.
and so I had to start school. And realizing that I only had one parent show up instead of two, I think that was the first realization for me. And so that's changed a lot now. So I think that the approach to custody is very different, and courts are not a big fan of splitting families. So joint custody is the preferred now. But I think that having gone through that as a child, I think that's probably why subconsciously I ended up in this profession, because I wanted to advocate for kids that couldn't speak for themselves. But anyway, I think that how it impacts kids is, I tell parents, when you divorce your partner, your relationship with them ends, but your child can't divorce you and can't divorce the other parent.
Yeah.
So however messy it is for you, there's an end date. You leave that to your kids, because your kids are going to still have to hear about it and deal with the other party all the time. So I tell parents, if your relationship has ended, that's between the two of you, right?
Yeah.
You have to maintain a united front for your kids, because because what kids all inevitably feel is that, does that mean that dad's no longer my dad or mom's no longer my mom?
Yeah, that's what they're going to think of. in their
Exactly.
head.
Am I to blame for somehow causing this? And I think that it's also, like I said, like your mom and dad is the first relationship that you have as a human being. And so when that relationship breaks, it causes a lot of insecurity in kids. It causes a lot of commitment issues in young adults, I've seen, because they don't know what a healthy relationship should look like. So I think there's a lot of like follow up thing, and I have this conversation with my mom all the time, because she often says I'm worried that what happened kind of like messed you up in a way, right? My mom says that, she's like, especially when I became an adult, she's like, I'm worried
You
that
say like it's too late for that.
and I tell her, I was like, no matter how good a parent you are, you can't protect your kids from the consequences of divorce, right? And no matter, and even if you and even if mom and dad do a really good job of being united and kind of co-parenting really, really well, the dissolution of that marriage is going to make any child question the sanctity of marriage, right? And I can tell you, a lot of kids from divorced households will kind of question whether they want to get married or not. Yeah,
it's very, very obvious.
Yeah.
For example, I grew up in my parents portrayed perfect marriage, right? So in my mind, right, I always thought that it wasn't even like I didn't even hesitate for a moment. I always thought that getting married is just the way to go.
It's just the way to go, yeah.
Yeah, but then when you speak, then you start to speak to. I have friends, that they did not grow up that way, and it was always in their mind like having a marriage was just never the way to go.
So me and my husband are both from divorced
how's your
parents.
husband's?
I think we both had very similar childhoods. And I think for him, he had more joint arrangement than I did. So I spent most of my time with my mom.
Yep.
But I think both of us kind of walked away from that, and I think both of us never really thought that we would get married. And then, but when we decided that we were going to, we started thinking about, we really didn't want our kids to go through the same thing, even though our mom and dad, really, I have to say that it wasn't the crazy like screaming, throwing things at each other thing like I hear some other families
That's why you
had.
turned out fine, right?
Yeah, but I think it did, like I said, like the whole commitment issues thing, I think that was normal. But I think both of us made the covenant that if we ever had a child, that we'd be family forever. So even if we get divorced, we would still be family, and our child would not feel, we'd do our best to make sure our child didn't feel the difference, right? So I often tease him, I'm like, now we have a kid, you're stuck with me, bro. Like you really can't get rid of me now. But I think that, parents have to remember that, like, it's so easy to vilify your ex in front of your child.
So easy.
Yeah, it's so easy to kind of like play the he said, she said.
I think what's bad is also like the mom, parents that would tell their children don't ever get married. Some
Yeah.
parents do that.
Yeah, of
and
course.
that's very like limiting.
I've
you know?
seen a lot of cases where some parents who got divorced, and then when their child grows up and becomes a young adult and meets someone, they become a deterrent for their child getting married.
Yeah.
Because all they see is the stuff that they went through.
Yes.
They don't see that their child has found a great partner who loves them. They don't see that. All they see is their own
Biases.
insecurities and biases, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that it's a difficult thing, but I tell all parents, like, especially when you have little ones, they cannot be your middle person. They're not at an age where they are capable of doing that. So whenever I have like little ones come to me and they tell me such intimate details about their parents' divorce, especially if there was infidelity involved and stuff. Like
What's
I had,
infidelity?
like if they did one party cheated on the other, and that's why they got divorced.
Yep.
I've had like little ones come up to me and say to me, well, serves my dad right for cheating on my mom and sleeping with his secretary. Like that came out of an 8-year-old's mouth.
Oh dear.
And you really,
it's so
you know, they shouldn't be privy to that level of information, because that's going to color how this girl inevitably looks at her dad, inevitably looks at all male relationships
Yeah,
moving
it
forward.
will.
You know, so
many of them.
yeah, so try to play nice lah. Marriages end. It happens, but
There's this there's this other topic also we can get into, which is what about parents who stay together for the kids? Yeah, you know, so whether that's right or wrong, or what it's gonna do for the kid, but it's so complicated, right?
it is. But I think it goes back to what are you trying to teach your child, right? Because if you are going to stay in a very unhappy marriage, or in a
Yes.
marriage where you're going to be screaming at each other all day,
Yeah.
that's going to, I hate to say damage your child, but that's going to have more consequences on your child than being apart and doing that healthily. I know so many people, even personally and even just in the celebrity world, who do co-parenting so well. And I think that is so much healthier on the children.
Co-parenting, which is they're separated but they still work together.
Yeah, they're separated,
Yeah.
but they still parent together. So they
Yes.
show up to all school things together. You know, they are in each other's lives. They
means a
have
lot to the
dinners.
children.
Yeah, and the
Yeah.
child are not affected by it, right? So I mean, like, I was just I saw it came out like on, sadly, my Instagram, but like the whole Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez thing, right? So Ben Affleck and his ex-wife Jennifer Garner co-parent extremely well. They have 3 kids, and you know, they show up to every football game together. They do PTA meetings together, and every time, you know, when each one of them had a new partner, once it was time to meet the family, they were all involved, right?
Yeah.
And so I
That's
think
beautiful.
and so the kids don't feel like they've lost a parent. They don't feel guilt over forming a relationship with the new partner, because so like Jennifer Garner loves Jennifer Lopez and has been very open about it. And so there's not been any like guilt over, am I allowed to, like, you know, you don't put your kids in a difficult position. There's a lot of celebrities who are not taking on that approach, and I know a lot of clients who've taken on that approach, and I really respect them for it, because the kids are gonna see what healthy relationships look like, even if it's not a marriage.
Yeah.
You know.
So basically, there is a very fine line, like staying together for the kids, but at what cost?
Yeah.
And what are your kids actually going to see? You know, is it it might just turn out to be much more detrimental, because
Yeah.
they start to have to grow up living in a fake loving family.
This is probably going to be controversial, but I feel that when parents say that it's more for them than the kids, they just use it as a line or as an excuse to say like, I'm staying for my children. It's more that you're staying because leaving is something that's too difficult for you. Because ask yourself, what exactly is your child benefiting from you guys being together if the relationship is in this way, right? So if you guys are arguing at each other's throats, what exactly is that benefiting your child, right? But I think a lot of the time,
But it's so complicated.
It is.
Because one party could want to stay, and the
Yeah.
other one doesn't want them to leave. You know.
yeah,
So
it's complicated. And I think that's also like, you know, when you've been married, especially for a while, and you've merged your lives, it's hard to kind of walk the other way. But I think that, you know, I've seen so many kids who've had to watch mom and dad rip each other's character down to the bone, because there's been so much animosity and tension that's built in that time. So yeah, I think, you know, it's a complicated decision, but I tell parents, you got to think about the message you're sending, and if you don't like that message, then you have to change it.
Okay. What time is it, Harish?
It's 1:35.
11:40.
Okay, yeah, you gotta go, right?
Soonish.
Yeah. There's actually this other topic, right, to bring up. I think this is gonna be. This is a very hot topic, man, in America.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you're probably well versed in it. The transgender children.
Yes.
Over the last 5 years, right, the numbers of children in America that are on hormone blockers has gone from, I think 5 years ago it was 2,000 in a year, and then right now it's pretty much doubled, 5,000 in a year. So what happens is children as early on as at the age of 8 years old, they are they go through gender dysphoria, which means that they are confused early on. Typically you see this in people who eventually turn out gay or trans. You can tell from a very early age on. Some of them they outgrow it, but some of them they turn gay or trans. But yeah, the concern is having kids that are at the age of 8 years old, and they decide that they feel like a girl maybe feels like a boy, and then you are given hormone blockers. What it does is if you give this girl hormone blockers, this girl that feels like a guy, it's gonna block out all the testosterones that she would have as a girl. So slowly turning that girl into a guy, and it's quite concerning because you don't know. First of all, it's something that has not been well studied, but people are not promoting it that way. You read much into all this?
Yeah, I've kind of been kept a little bit up to date on it, and of course there have been some children or some young adults.
You probably have clients like that.
Yeah. None of them have gone on the treatment because I think it's a little bit harder to access here in Malaysia.
Right?
But it is something that it's more of a discussion now. I think just because it's a lot more out in the open than before, so I think that parents are a lot more open to bringing kids in to speak to someone when it comes up, when these topics come up. So it's definitely something that's happening. I think that I'm really on the fence when it comes to medicating a child at a young age for anything. And I feel that yes, I do believe that these children go through quite a great deal amount of suffering when they identify as a gender that's not the gender they were born with. And there has been a lot of research already that's shown the potential for them to self-harm and have severe mental health issues if they're not given if they're not able to express themselves in the right way. But I feel that going down the route of hormone blockers or surgery or anything at a very young age is not just dangerous, but also something you have to do. It takes a lot of consideration, right? So I would say it has to be something that has to go on for years in working with psychiatrists and psychologists and ensuring that it's something that is in the benefit of the child. But I think that so going down that route I think can be quite tricky. And there have been cases, I think, also recently of young adults who've said that they've gone on blockers and then after a few years realized that they no longer identified as that gender and then coming off it. So I think that, anything that comes with gender is something that really requires time and patience and understanding. But when you go down, like even in Malaysia, if you are considering any form of surgery, you have to work with a psychiatrist even if you didn't request one. And that's because they want to ensure that you're making the right decision for you and it's you're of sound mind and all of that stuff. So it's a very difficult thing.
Let's talk about the POV of the child itself. So let's say your child is a teenager, early teenagers in junior high school, 13, 14. And you probably don't fit in school. You've always had trouble fitting in because they say that a lot of these cases, but surely enough, right? If you are a kid that has been having gender dysphoria since you're young, it's going to be hard for you to feel normal and fit in. Surely enough, it's like that. But also, then you are influenced by friends. Maybe you have another friend that also went through something similar, and then they're saying that now that there are trans influencers that are pushing the children to take these hormones, like saying that you'll feel much better and you'll solve all of your problems. But the things that they don't talk about is possible side effects and how legitimate is the research done, so yeah, it's very interesting times, huh?
Yeah, it is. And I think, I'm not going to say that, it's not something that is real and that it's all just a fad or anything, right? But I think that what's important is that, I always feel that, influencers are in this very unique position where they can influence the minds of very impressionable people.
Especially younger kids.
Exactly. And while I'm sure their intention was to speak from experience and to say that, I went down this journey and I felt better and everything, you also could run the risk of advertising to kids who might be struggling for different reasons that this is what you need to do in order to feel better.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the risk where I say you have to be very careful with how you speak about things. I mean, I have clients who have told me, like, I identify as male or female, a different gender, or I identify as non-binary. Like, they're very open with telling me these things, and they say that, I'd really like to, to get surgery done or to go on medication, but they're like 14 or 13. And what I always tell them is like, look, I respect how you feel, and I think that you absolutely deserve the right to explore kind of how you feel. But at the same time, I think looking at it from a medical perspective, your body's still developing. And so there could be a lot of changes that are coming that we can't predict yet. And so by taking the route maybe now at this young age, you could get an outcome that you are not going to like, right? So I would say, wait until your body is fully developed, or, you've kind of gotten to that end point where you can go, okay, I still don't feel me. I still don't feel like I'm born in the right body. I don't like how I feel in my own skin. And this is what I want to do. Then have at it, but when you're 13 and your body is not fully developed, right? I had a client who was deathly terrified of developing breasts because she identified as male. I'm saying she because she hasn't changed her pronouns. So, she identifies as male and keeps talking about wanting to get top surgery so that her breasts don't come in. And I said to her, I was like, but do we know for sure that it's going to?
Right? They were just talking about this. So basically, some kids even use like binder tape, binder tapes, and this could be physically harming also to your body.
But I think that's the thing. Like, we look at the consequence of those kids not being heard, and then, like I said, the mental health impact of that, and feeling like, just the risk
they want the kid to be free, or they don't want the kid.
The risk of depression and stuff really goes up when you don't give them that opportunity. So, so I tell my kids that if this is something that you're feeling, let's talk about it. Let's work through it. Let's make sure it's the right thing for you and it's how you feel. And let's give your body the time to do what it needs to do. And then once we get to that end point, if you still feel differently, you're an adult, you're physically at the place where you need to be, and then things are easier. So that's kind of how I navigate that conversation with my kids. But I have 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds who are talking about it. But on the flip side, I also have like 10-year-olds who tell me, like, I feel like I want to be a boy. And then I say, okay, so why would you like to be a boy? And then it's something along the lines of, they're being bullied by the boys at school, and they feel that boys never get bullied.
That's exactly my point.
So
that's exactly what I'm so concerned about. Is you see, like you mentioned, you're having 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds tell you this. Isn't it a little bit odd that maybe 10 years ago, not nearly as many children are having these type of conversations? So an argument to that, it would be, there's less information out there, so people know less about understanding their bodies.
I think there were a lot less boxes that you could fit into 10 years ago. And there were a lot less people who looked different and who spoke about it 10 years ago. So I think because of that, kids, like you said, can go online and they can see somebody who's non-binary and be like, that's me, or they identify with people that they can see now, which back, I know adults in their 40s and 50s now who are only coming out as gay or lesbian in their 50s, because back then
they don't dare.
You'd be disowned. It would be something that, so I think that to say that these things didn't exist back then, I think is not true. I think it was more that it was significantly suppressed because they didn't have the ability to. But now but now I think it's a lot more of a discussion, so kids are questioning it and discussing it more openly. But I always say, like, I think Asian parents more so are deathly afraid of the conversation because they're just like, what am I going to do, right?
Asian parents in particular, they
Yeah.
are so confused, or they just don't know how to handle it.
Like I tell parents, like if your child is talking about it, don't immediately assume that she's telling you that she wants to be a boy or he wants to be a girl or anything.
Yeah.
It could very well be that it's something they need
She
to
heard
discuss.
from the friends probably, or
Yeah,
it
gender
could be.
identity is something that all kids go through and question as part of a developmental step. So it's normal, but I think parents get so, and they start going on a witch hunt, like it's social media. I say, look, just take a breath, right? And so, just recently, the girl wanting to be a boy, and mom was just really panicked about it. And I said, like, okay, look, just take a breath. Let's find out what's going on. Yeah. And and I've told my husband the same thing. I'm like, if you hear half of the things that I hear at work, I think you as a parent were probably just like, oh my
Freak
gosh.
out as well.
Yeah, but I think that it's, just take a breath and then speak to your child, and you can figure out what's the next course of action.
Yeah, and also some parents will do whatever makes their kid happy. So
Hopefully.
some parents would. So if the kid says that they feel like a boy and they want to be a boy, and the kids the parents would, because they don't want the kid to feel alienated, or they want them to be happy as their true self, so they would let them take whatever hormone blockers that they think that they should take. But it's just very risky, this sort of things.
Of course.
It's not as simple as it is.
I think more commonly is like when parents have kids who are, very depressed and they start self-harming and things. And so the parents see it as life-saving to put their kids on. I've watched documentaries where parents have described hormone blockers and surgery as life-saving because
Why?
they had children who were so depressed, they were self-harming, cutting themselves, and might have attempted suicide on a few occasions because they were so unhappy.
Yeah.
And so they see it as, because you said like how wanting to make sure your kids are happy. A lot of parents have described it as saving their child's life because their mental health deteriorated so much. So I think that there is that to consider, but I think that what's I've noticed is just parents are, as a mom myself, it is a very difficult conversation, right? It is a very difficult concept. Like if your child comes to you and has these feelings, how do you navigate? It's a big fear for parents. And you just,
fear.
we don't, I remember feeling this way, like when we left the hospital with my daughter, I'm like, you really don't get a manual on how to keep these humans alive. Like you just get sent home on day 3, like keep her alive for the rest of her life. And you really feel so ill-equipped. And then when you have things like this, which you might not have personal experience with, how the heck are you supposed to help your child? I think that's the one thing all parents feel. But
some people, right, would just label these parents that enable the kids to take these hormonal changing drugs, right? They would label them as like abusive parents, But the thing is, have you been in those parents' shoes? When you're in the parents' perspective, they want so desperately to help out their kids. So a lot of it is also they are in a state of panic and they're unsure about a lot of things, but they just want to take the route that they think would make their kid the happiest, in the fastest way. Yeah.
So I think it's a very complicated process, and it's a very difficult one. And I think that no parent wants to, or at least I'd like to believe that no parent wants to do anything that puts their child in harm's way. And if they believe, like you said, that it's something that's going to save their child's life or make their child happy, then they're more likely to do it. And I think it's so much easier for people on the outside to judge because it's not their journey, and so I think
of course.
I think that's sort of just
that's the comments though,
the general message for people is like, just stop judging.
The internet comments in the internet is really fucked up.
It's really, really
just
harsh.
Don't read any of them.
Just disable the comment function on your kids' Instagram. Just don't expose your kids to that type of stuff. It's just
Okay, I think we're gonna wrap right now.
Good.
Yeah, well, how long was that one? Alright guys, so if you've watched up till this point and you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a comment of a kid emoji with a splash sign at the side of it. Okay? And guys, leave a comment, share your thoughts on the episode, press the subscribe button, share this video with your friends. Okay? I try my best to reply every single one of y'all in the comments, and appreciate so much those of y'all who have been supporting me up till this point. Guys, Katyana, soon to be Dr. Katyana, right? And I would love to have you on maybe next time.
Sure.
Yeah, and when you Probably if you decide to write a book in the future,
Oh, yeah.
come on the podcast and then talk about the book.
We'll
you know.
we'll do.
How long is your PhD course?
If I can finish it on time, 3 years.
And now how long has it been
I
already?
haven't fully started it yet, so I have 3
Okay.
years to go.
Oh shit. Okay.
Yeah.
And then you were mentioning that you wanted to do what do you call that? Your thesis, is it? You have to do a thesis?
Yeah, it's part of it, yeah.
Is it like an open subject based on whatever you want to
Yeah.
write about?
So,
That's the great part about it.
Yeah,
right?
so it's based on what we want to do, and so long as we can find the data and we can write it well, then yeah, that's the plan.
How much is the minimum word count usually?
Oh gosh, I have no idea.
50 oh, you
I'd
don't
have
even want to think
yeah,
about
it
it,
depends.
huh?
It depends on the university. I think like every university has a different requirement. I haven't found out what mine is yet, but yeah.
Generally more than 10,000, right?
Oh, definitely more than 10,000.
50,000,
Yeah. So it really
Fun.
depends. Yeah, fun. So
Fun.
3 years of my life is going to be that, but yeah, we'll see.
Okay. All right, guys. And I hope you all enjoyed this episode. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Give it up for soon-to-be Dr. Katyana. Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, good. Oh, no.
Missing my homies, I'm missing my oldies, my brothers, my cronies. We all went to court, but before only courts that we knew were the ones where we were shooting three, selling Kobe. To a legend, rest in peace to the old me, rest in peace to my brothers, rest in peace to my whole team. The oldest, I'm missing my shawty.